Alrighty, I guess we're here. Hey everybody, welcome to the Convo Couch. I am Fiorella Isabel and I have with me three amazing guests. I wanted to have this conversation because I've been having arguments with other people about this very topic regarding China, regarding Russia, regarding multipolarity, regarding what's really going on behind the scenes of what we're seeing, this shift and the fall of the West. Of course, in line with that is the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. We have the tensions rising between China and the United States. These are things we talk about on the show all the time. But behind that, of course, is the talk about the Great Reset and what that means in terms of the surveillance state, what that means in terms of the nation states. Is that really happening? Is the resistance real? Are we really going into a world of multipolarity, or is this just all a facade? So with me today, I have the three wonderful guests. We have Danny Haiphong from Black Agenda Report, who also has his own YouTube channel. And we also have with us Ryan Christian from the Last American Vagabond, who has been censored by Twitter, YouTube, you name it, and who does great analysis as well. And then we have Matthew Ehret, the Canadian patriot, has his own Substack, historian, has done several discussions or roundtables or such about this very topic as well. And I wanted to bring in three different perspectives because I pay attention to all three of you. I follow all of you on social media, so I kind of get a gist as to where you are on this. And so I really just wanted to dive deep into these conversations. So thank you for being here.
It's great to be on.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Okay, great. So let's just get started because I have a lot of questions. So on what's been going on with the US provocations in Taiwan, right? I want to get into the bottom of what are the reasons for the visits? Is this militarily a pushback from the West into fluffing their feathers against China? Is it deeper? We're going to talk about the economics of it, right? So Nancy Pelosi went to Taipei against China's wishes. Most recently, Senator Markey also took a delegation as well, even though China was largely against Pelosi's visit, and then there were some economic retaliations along the way. Let's also remember that on paper, the US recognizes the One China policy, and let's also mention that Taiwan is the largest semiconductor producer. And so I wanted to first off get to this question, which when this happened with Pelosi and China didn't respond militarily, a lot of people in the West were claiming, hey, that is showing China's weakness. China is showing that they're not going to go through with their word. Although, let's be fair, China never said they were going to take down Pelosi's plane. They said they might escort the plane. It wasn't anything that was really indicated other than people's desires for Pelosi's plane to not make it, right? So was China weak? And if not, were they attacking this in a different, more methodical economic way? And I'll start, of course, let me just start with Ryan.
Well, first, Tap, thanks for having us all on. I appreciate the opportunity to have the conversation. I think ultimately we can look at that situation and see that the entire conversation about her plane being shot down or military action was this, bluster, the corporate media creation, in my opinion. Now, it's not that that's not possible, obviously, but I think that was the corporate media pushing that and the arguments from the partisanship showing their face. And I think ultimately, I never thought that was in the cards. I think that was an obvious reality, that would have been a gigantic overstep. I mean, there's a lot of things that we could have talked about in that regard, but my opinion to kind of start off from the beginning of all of it is that this was more of a, I hate to even talk about things that could be distractions from other topics because that's a common argument, but I do believe that this was more of a look over there kind of a thing, even though there's always been this ongoing issue there that is very important. But I think that her going there and the issue was meant to create this conversation again and take your focus away from other things, but ultimately to maybe, in my opinion, create the illusion that there's more divide than there really is. Because I have the stance more so that from a core level, there's much more coordination happening behind the scenes than we like to talk about. Now, that does not mean there's not adversarial situations happening in a lot of different political ways. But I think the crux of the point of this discussion today is I believe that it's more about larger agendas playing out. And I think that was more of a misdirection tactic personally, but there's a lot to be said. I'm sure we're going to get into about Taiwan and the right to declare independence, or whether that's even what's happening, and whether, and so on. But just to kind of start off the overview, that's what I think.
Okay, awesome. And Matthew, I want to hear from you as well.
Yes, absolutely. Well, from my standpoint, I do think that there is an element of distraction in there, and Putin did come out and he said something to that effect not that long ago, to deflect from the actual collapse of the banking system, the entire social structure within the United States itself, and I would say the broader transatlantic. There's an element of that, but I would think that looking at the last decade of Taiwan, especially starting in 8 years. I see a lot of parallels. I think a lot of people do to the game plan that was deployed in Ukraine. And 2014 wasn't just the year where you had an NED, U.S. State Department organized regime change in Ukraine, but you also had a sunflower revolution as well in Taiwan, 2014, which saw the installation effectively of the current configuration of power of puppets in that regime. And just like in the case of Ukraine, there was, they were very close to consolidating a new trade agreement with the Eurasian Economic Union that would have integrated Ukraine ever more into the Eurasian Economic Union orientation, which is much more focused on industrial growth, not so much speculation or just cash cropping, which is how some people wanted to see Ukraine. Same thing for Taiwan. The Kuomintang were very close to finalizing a very important free trade agreement with many aspects with mainland China. Already their trade is, I think it's 50% of their trade goes to mainland and also Hong Kong. So it's, I think that what we have had now is an effort to try to, just like we see the full spectrum dominance and encirclement of Russia with an ideology of getting a capability of launching a first strike without having a retaliation by Russia, by those controlling the whole full spectrum dominance, program in the West. You see the same thing with 100,000 U.S. troops built up around China's perimeter. And THAAD missile shields in South Korea. And basically, I think right now, there's a position of weakness that the U.S. is coming at the situation. Their entire system, as we pointed out, is collapsing. And I think that China has time on their side. They're not necessarily. It's not a sign of their weakness that they didn't choose to go in aggressively. I think that they are aware that it's a matter of being able to wait and allow the self-cannibalizing technocrats to eat themselves up. I think so. That there's a lot of patience, and so they let Pelosi do her thing. But overall, last word, I think they just want to throw in everything at China right now possible that they have as assets within the Pacific, and the kitchen sink. And the kitchen sink happens to be any Asian country that is that can be used to light a flame around China's perimeter and justify a U.S. military buildup. That's how I'm seeing it.
And Danny, do you see this? Ryan mentioned something about there's been a lot of talk behind the scenes. Do you think there's been a lot of talk behind the scenes, or do you think that China just methodically chose to act in a more economic, retaliatory way instead of a militaristic way?
Well, there's always channels, and surely there's always back channels. But I find what's interesting about China's response is that I think there's been a lot of downplaying how China actually did put into place a series of measures after Pelosi's visit that are pretty significant. And this included actually stopping very key defense coordination talks that had been happening. And many people don't know about them because, again, these are channels that aren't necessarily public. So I think there were about three back channels, 3 defense coordination measures that were completely canceled. So China took this very seriously, and they conducted live fire drills surrounding Taiwan, and I believe 5 or 6 different places, basically showing that if the United States wants to play with fire, that it will actually get burned, because there is absolutely no way that the United States can use Taiwan in the way that I think a large section of the foreign policy establishment wants to use Taiwan, as what it was prior to the One China policy, which was a de facto U.S. military base with tens of thousands of U.S. troops, with nuclear weapons possibly pointing right at China. That's how the Cold War played out. After the One China policy, those troops went home, but the United States passed the Taiwan Relations Act in 1979, which basically said that the One China policy didn't stop it from sending tens of billions of dollars in weapons to Taiwan. And that has escalated since this pivot to Asia, which was formerly put into place in 2012, but talked about since 2009, where Obama, then Trump, now Biden continue to increase what is now, I think, like a 14, 15, probably will be a lot more than that very soon, $1 billion backlog in weapons transfers to Taiwan, and as well as sending military personnel. I think there's about 20 plus military personnel there stationed in Taiwan, which is double, which went up 2 times between 2020 and 2021. So this has a military component, of course, all of this when it comes to Taiwan. As Matt was saying, this is a larger plan to militarily encircle China. Taiwan is just a chip into that, not to be ironic with the reference to chips. It is actually maybe the biggest chip in terms of how the United States wants to create a situation which we could compare to Ukraine, but I think that the stakes are actually higher, because unlike Ukraine, which, people can have their arguments about how, the Soviet Union fell and Ukraine, became a sovereign country. The fact of the matter is that under international law, as it stands right now, Taiwan is part of China and Ukraine is not. So there is, and Ukraine is not part of Russia. So there is a big difference here that I think actually raises the stakes militarily. In terms of economics, of course, this is going on. The U.S. passed the CHIPS Act. They're trying to play what I think is a pretty suicidal game, pressuring Taiwan to use its massive semiconductor industry, which is basically almost all of the world's total, and maneuver in a way. Pelosi's son was there. He's a big tech magnate. Like there are these maneuvers trying to be done to try to isolate China from the semiconductor industry. That's the end game. The United States thinks it's going to build these semiconductors. I think nothing of the sort will actually happen. But the point is that all of this could actually backfire big time on Taiwan. And Matt is correct. There is only time that China has to kind of wait this out, because the economic and military measures the U.S. is taking don't bode well for itself. Like, continue to provoke this. There's no advantage that the United States has right now militarily. Economically, Taiwan could be in big trouble if the U.S. continues to pursue its policy of trying to isolate China, which Taiwan is its local economy is a huge partner with China, while at the same time doing something that U.S. investors, the financiers, investors, they're not going to do. They're not going to pour money into building what's needed to have a semiconductor industry here. They're going to take that money and they're going to do what they always do with it, which is cash in. And so it's really a suicidal course. And I think China's measures were actually pretty strong. And I think with the understanding that this was actually going to continue, that this is not some kind of one-off. And of course, Ed Markey proved that. And I think that this is also a big political move in the sense that the Democrats are really desperate right now. There's just no doubt about that. Everything the Democratic Party is doing right now is really all about showing that it has legitimacy coming up in this midterm election, from the Inflation Reduction Act to all these moves around China. All of it is to try to make the Democratic Party look strong, right? Militaristic towards China, tough on China, and also look at how much the Democrats are addressing the economy. That's kind of what also is going on here as well. And that's why Nancy Pelosi can't really, she can barely talk as it is, but she can't really talk about it in any kind of clear way, because she doesn't, I don't think she has a grasp of all of the interests at heart, but the main one for her is to try to keep her in a position that she's in. She does not want to be ousted as the majority leader in November, even though that's pretty likely going to be the case.
Fee, if I could clarify one point, I wanted to make sure it's clear that the discussion of them talking behind the scenes, that definitely is there too. But what I was more saying is just more general collaboration, not even necessarily only around Taiwan, just to make that clear. And I think that adds to point to add to this whole thing is that I think both of these things are kind of simultaneous, or at the very least, we should be asking how prevalent a very real divide that is happening in this country of like this kind of technocratic direction versus these old school neocon kind of mentality that is playing at the same time, where I think there's part of this, like ask whether there are vying interests within the United States in the same idea and playing that game on the world stage and with foreign policy. Whereas that might be what's happening with Taiwan, whereas there is collaboration from like a technocratic great reset direction with these governments or parts of them. But there's also parts of them that want to push this issue with Taiwan. And it very clearly has overlaps we'll probably get into with, like, for instance, the Donbass region in Ukraine and how that plays and looking at one and ignoring the other and so on. But I just want to clarify that. So before we go forward.
Yeah, so just going forward then on that route, right? Multipolarity. A lot of talk has been happening around multipolarity, that, you know, the West is falling apart. They're doing this to themselves. In some ways, people have said this is the controlled demolition of the West, meaning the United States and the EU are sanctioning Russia and are doing this to their own detriment, right? People in the EU right now are looking for ways to perhaps warm themselves in the winter by finding firewood. They're being told that they should take cold showers. They're being told they should leave the country in the winter. I mean, these are the things that are happening right now because of this conflict. Now, Russia's being blamed, and we're going to bring in Russia into this because it seems like the United States is trying to fight a two-front war. And we all know that the United States cannot win a two-front war right now. I mean, they're not winning right now against Russia via Ukraine, and they cannot beat China either. So that is something that is happening, but that's what it seems like they're trying to do. Now, this resistance that's come from China and from Russia has been seen to many as this age of ushering in a multipolar world, going from the unilateral world where the United States called all the shots, where the United States basically dictated something and everybody else had to follow along, to a world where there is more of a discussion, more of an equitable world where you have nations within Africa pushing back against the West. Most recently, South Africa saying that the West always seems to want to boss them around, that they have more reliance in BRICS countries. And then you also have, of course, Latin America. What's happening in Latin America with the pink tide? What's going on with them focusing on gaining sovereignty against this, century-old, at this point, just control by the United States and the West. So we're seeing that pushback. The question is this pushback towards multipolarity a real thing, or is it just a giant facade? And I wanted to start this discussion because I think a lot of you will have a lot to say about this by playing this video of Vladimir Putin. He talked about this. He talked about this, a group of, he called them global elites, and saying that the United States wants to distract the population away from the problems they have at home by focusing on Russia and China. So, Sleepy, if we can just play it and then we'll discuss.
I did not get sent that video.
Oh, okay. So it's
If
on
you
the
send me a
slide.
link, I can get it up.
Yeah. Where would you like the link?
Throw it in the private chat.
Private chat of what? I'm sorry.
StreamYard.
Oh, StreamYard. Okay. 1 second. And if anybody has anything to say while I do that, you're welcome to start on the discussion. Let me see.
Well, I guess, since there's time to talk, I think that it's interesting that we can see both of these things happening simultaneously, right? I mean, I think there's an effort to make that happen, right? And I don't even know why anybody would oppose the idea where people have their own voice as opposed to one group leading it all. But I think that that's more of, again, that kind of vying agenda at the end of the day. And I think we can kind of see that from a core value or core level, all of these governments are at least inching toward the direction of what the World Economic Forum is pushing, which is by no means multipolar in any way, in my opinion, but I'm sure we can discuss that.
Okay. Sleepy, do you have it?
I'm just about done. I got it up in a second.
Okay, great. So we'll be right there.
Ситуация на Украине показывает, что США пытаются затянуть этот конфликт. И точно так же они действуют, разжигая конфликтный потенциал в Азии, Африке, Латинской Америке. Как известно, недавно США в очередной раз сознательно попытались подлить масло в огонь и раскачать ситуацию в Азиатско-Тихоокеанском регионе. Американская авантюра в отношении Тайваня – это не просто поездка отдельного безответственного политика, а часть целенаправленной, сознательной стратегии США по дестабилизации и хаотизации обстановки в регионе и мире. Наглая демонстрация неуважения к суверенитету других стран и к своим международным обязательствам. Видим в этом тщательно спланированную провокацию. Очевидно, что с помощью подобных действий западные глобалистские элиты, в том числе, пытаются отвлечь внимание своих собственных граждан от острых социально-экономических проблем. Падения уровня жизни, безработицы, бедности, деиндустриализации. Переложить собственные провалы на другие страны, на Россию, на Китай, которые отстаивают свою точку зрения. Строят суверенную политику развития, не подчиняясь диктату наднациональных элит.
All right. So, Danny, do you see this pushback from Russia and China and what Putin just said as nations standing up for their own sovereign right, or do you see it as something more?